now that we know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide with whole numbers, we're going to look at some order of operations problems where we combine all of these things. So typically when we think of order of operations, a lot of us will remember the acronym PEMDAS, which the P stands for parentheses. I've seen where some schools and some teachers are actually calling this GEMDAS or GEMDAS with a G, because they're saying instead of parentheses, it's grouping, right? So it's just important to know, even if you do still use the P, that this is technically for any grouping symbol. So like, for example, if you have something inside square brackets is really just another type of parentheses. So that would be considered on this step. But also if you have square root symbols, if you have absolute value symbols, those are considered grouping symbols. So it's any grouping symbol, and then you would do what's inside of it. So like if you had a problem that had a square root, that just means that if there's something to compute underneath the square root before actually taking the square root, you should do that first, right? So the order of operations tells us what order we should do things in. So we would start with parentheses or grouping symbols. Then the next step would be to go through and do any exponents, right? So apply any exponents. And so for example, if we had something like 2 to the third, that in that expression, we would say that 2 is the base and 3 is the exponent. And the exponent tells us how many times we are repeatedly multiplying the base. So 2 to the third is the same thing as saying 2 times itself 3 times, or 2 times 2 times 2. And then once you're done applying any exponents, the next step is multiplication and division. And so this is where probably most confusion comes from, is a lot of people think that you're supposed to do all your multiplication first and then go through and do all your division. You're not. Those two are together, right? So multiplication and division are done together, meaning at the same time. And so then if you have both multiplication and division, how do you know what you should do first? You should do whatever's on the left, right? So we move left to right, but we do multiplication and division together. And then the same thing with addition and subtraction. Those two are together from left to right. So we would do them at the same time, and whichever one's on the left would go first. So let's look at several examples here for what we would do with order of operations. So if we look at this example, number A, or letter A, we would first look for any parentheses or grouping symbols and do what's inside of those first. In this case, I'm not seeing any of that. So then I would move on to the E, which stands for exponents. And in this case, I am seeing an exponent here. So I would go ahead and I would apply that. So 9 squared is the same thing as saying 9 times 9. And 9 times 9 is 81. So if you decide that you want to show some work, right? So, and it just depends on what group of students you're showing this to, if they would need to see that or not, right? So if I wanted to show, for example, 9 times 9, and that's how I'm getting 9 squared, or 81, then you want to, if you're going to put it below, then you're going to need to bring everything else down, right? So just be aware that every step that you show, you should bring everything else down. You should not be doing 9 times 9 equals 81 and then go back to your original problem, because that's really hard for students to follow, right? So like if I have this work shown here and then all of a sudden I change what I'm doing to some, to the rest of the problem, that can be hard for students to follow. So if you decide that you do want to do some work like that and you don't want to have to bring down every step, what I recommend doing is doing it as side work, right? And that means on the side, right? So if you want to off to the side do 9 times 9 is 81, then we can go back to our problem and bring everything down, and the 9 squared is now 81. So this is something that you probably didn't have to worry about too much before, because as long as you had the right process, your teacher probably counted it right. But since you're transitioning to becoming teachers, you want to show this in a way that you would show students, in a way that's easy for students to follow. If they, went to the restroom, came back, and looked up at the board, that they could follow what steps you did, right? So now that I've applied the exponents, now I would move on to my next step, which is both multiplication and division from left to right. And so I have no division on this one, but I do have more than one multiplication. So it would be okay, since those are separate, to go ahead and just do both of those. Technically, I would do the one on the left first. So technically I would do 5 times 9, which would give me 45. So technically you would do that first and then bring down the rest. But the very next thing you're going to do is your other multiplication. So it would be okay to go ahead and do both of those in one writing step. So 6 times 7 is 42. And then I just bring down my minus 81. And so now I've done all the multiplication and division, and I'm ready for the last step, which is addition and subtraction. And I do have both. And in this case, I would do the addition first because it's on the left, right? So I would add 45 plus 42. In this case, that's going to give me 87. Again, if you wanted to go ahead and subtract 81, I think that would be fine. Again, it depends on your group of students and what steps they're okay with you skipping, right? But it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and just bring down the minus 81. And then finally, the only thing left to do here is subtract that, and I get an answer of 6.